going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with the video. It's Wednesday, time to take a look at my favorite trade targets for week 8. I'll start off by mentioning the Ravens again, and they actually look even stronger as trade targets after the Bengals beat the Steelers last week. Despite being 1-5, Baltimore is only 3 games back from first place in their division, and they've got a pretty easy rest of season strength of schedule. The Ravens aren't even close to being out of it right now, but their offense is obviously going to have to play really well once Lamar returns, because they don't need to win out, but they do need to win a lot of games rest of the season. And their defense is so bad that even as they get a little bit healthier, they're not going to have the defense they used to have in the past. I'm hoping Lamar returns this week. I don't know if that's going to happen, but even if he doesn't, I would just use that as extra opportunity for leverage. If you're trading for Lamar, Zay, Derrick Henry, and he doesn't end up playing, that's just another thing you can point to if you're talking to teams with trades, being like, hey, we have another week where he's not going to be out there, another week of down performances. Try your best to try and acquire them for a little bit cheaper. And if he does return, understand that I think he's probably the quarterback 1 overall rest of season when he's back. I think once he returns, every single week, Zay Flowers is going to be like a mid-range wide receiver 2. And that Derrick Henry is going to be like a mid to low end running back 1. Really depends on game script for him. But again, what I always bring up, or what I brought up last 2 weeks with these guys, is that this team is completely different, obviously, once Lamar returns, and especially Derrick Henry. We know that he's very, very, very game script dependent. So when they're winning, which they're going to win most of their games rest of the season once Lamar returns. When they're winning, he's like a high-end running back 1. When they're losing, he's like a low-end running back 2. And so if they're going to be winning more of these games, he's going to have a lot more value than he's had recently. And also, if they're in this must-win mode, they're not really resting him, right? If they end up out of the playoffs at any point, of course, that'll be very bad for us. But I just don't think that's going to happen. The Steelers are not that good of a team. We know the Bengals aren't going to win out. We know the Browns aren't going to be competitive. This is not a division you're very fearful of. And so they could realistically drop to 1-6, and I still think they'd have a chance at the division. It would be very difficult at that point. So you really want Lamar back this week and for them to win this game. But they are also 6.5-point favorites right now at home. That's a game they could win. I don't know if they'll end up being favorites, but could still win even without Lamar. After those 3, I think the number 1 trade target remains Brock Bowers. He's going to return after the bye this week, so he'll return starting in week 9. So I'm pretty sure this is the last chance to trade for him. It is extremely likely that the team that drafted him is struggling to some degree. It doesn't mean they're 0-7, but to some degree, the team that drafted him is probably not doing that great. So ideally, maybe you're able to sound like a depth trade. So these are always the ones we want. In a trade, we always want to be acquiring the best player. And if we can ever do a 2-for-1 to upgrade that player and then just add someone off free agency, we always want to do that. And so something like Fannin Etienne, Gadsden Waddle, Pitts Breece Hall, something like that, where you're giving up kind of like a fringe starter at tight end, a relatively okay option, plus, a solid low end running back 1 or running back 2, wide receiver 2, something like that. It depends though. Maybe the team that drafted Pitts ends up getting Fannin, and they're like, you know what, I'm honestly fine using Fannin rest of season, and maybe they prefer 2 wide receiver 2s, or a running back 2 and a wide receiver 2, something like that. Those are still the trades I would prefer to do, instead of sending a low-end running back 1 or a low-end wide receiver 1. At that point, I feel like you're kind of taking a big hit at that position to upgrade tight end, and I would rather just take 2 players and upgrade the 1 spot at tight end. And again, I'd be willing to do a back half running back 2 and a back half wide receiver 2. As for some new names, I think Justin Jefferson is a really good player to buy low on right now. Obviously, no one is giving away Justin Jefferson for free. So you got to understand you're paying a top 5 wide receiver price tag for you. But if that's the market you're in, some of you are looking at things being like, I don't know if I can win unless I get together a deal for a wide receiver 1. If that's you, I think Jefferson is the one I would go after. He's already had his bye, so you don't have to worry about that rest of the season. The Vikings have the 2nd best remaining strength of schedule for wide receivers and the number 1 playoff schedule for wide receivers. In week 15, they're at Dallas. That's an awesome game. Week 16 at the Giants. Week 17 home versus the Lions. So those are 3 fantastic spots for wide receivers. and the dome games against the Cowboys and Lions in weeks 15, so the first week of the fantasy playoffs, and 17, championship weekend. Those are going to come with crazy upside for Jefferson. It's not a guarantee he's going to have like 8 for 120 in a score, but the upside that this Vikings offense will have in that game is immense. And especially at this point of the season, if you feel like if you're 5-2, you're looking real good for playoffs. Even if you're 4-3, we build teams that typically peak in the second half of the year. So if you've been able to start off 4-3, you've got a lot of points for, you've got young players in your team, you should feel phenomenal about making playoffs this season. And so you should be focusing on what is the playoff strength of schedule for my best roster right now, and find guys who have league-winning upside in those weeks. And so again, if you are in the market for a wide receiver one, Justin Jefferson is the one I'd go after. If you're in the market for a tight end but can't quite afford Bowers and don't really have that much to give up, or just don't want to, which I also want to reiterate, like, tight end is not a position where you typically want to be selling your team for. You never want to buy high. That's the worst thing you can do. We talked about Sam LaPorta earlier this year as a sell high. Like, you don't want to, after a good game for a tight end, go after them and pay a premium. You never want to do that. The data is very clear on that. But LaPorta coming off a bad game, so we have an opportunity here where you can maybe buy low. But then also it's like, you just never want to be giving up, consistent starters for your team. You got to start 2 running back or 2 wide receiver at a minimum. You've got that flex spot where you play skill players. We've got buys and injuries. So I don't want to be like harming our depth too much here. But what I want to mention is basically just see what the LaPorta team looks like. Did they add a free agent tight end that's solid? So they're basically like, I don't even know who to start between LaPorta and this tight end. Maybe LaPorta was like their second tight end in the draft. That's probably more unlikely, but just kind of see what the state of their team is. If they kind of don't need LaPorta, I feel like he'd be someone that, you could swap for like someone you've been using as a bye week fill-in right now, especially if they're just like not needing the tight end and they're relatively weak at one of running back or wide receiver. I just see if you could get a deal done. LaPorta does have the number 1 remaining strength of schedule for tight ends. He also has the number 1 playoff schedule for tight ends. It's worth noting too that the Lions end the season with 6 consecutive dome games starting in week 12. And so LaPorta not only gets great matchups for tight ends specifically, but he also avoids the bad weather games. We're starting to get into that time of year. We saw it last week where a lot of these like New England games, especially maybe middle of the country, north or middle of the country, like they're going to have bad games. There's going to be rain, there's going to be wind, there's going to be cold weather. Well, they're not going to happen to the Detroit Lions. Week 12 on, all dome games, all good weather games, and number 1 strength of schedule for tight ends. And so again, to be clear, I am not giving up a consistent starter. If you have a running back or wide receiver that is always in your starting lineup, do not give them up for Sam LaPorta. But if it's 2 bench options, if it's even 1 bench option as a fill-in, I'd be totally fine, because I think rest of the season, he's in mid-range tight end 1. If you've been like really frustrated with tight end, you've been trying to play the stream game, but you just haven't been hitting, I would be able to trust him rest of the season. Another cheaper option to go over this time at running back is Jaylen Warren. I don't think he's necessarily like super cheap, but I really liked him in the summer. And I'll admit, when we had that huge game from Gainwell, and he looked great. It wasn't just like a random big game where he busted off like 1 long run and the stat line looks good, but it was really on 1 good play. Like, Gainwell looked really, really good in that game against the Vikings. So I was concerned. And I didn't love that obviously Jaylen Warren was averaging 3.1 yards per carry before the injury. And I was like, oh no, he's not being efficient. Now Gainwell looks awesome. This doesn't look great. But post-injury, it's only 2 games, and one was in a great matchup. But 6.6 yards per carry, of course, better than 3.1. He's looked really good. He seemed to have iced Gainwell in their last game. 21 opportunities for Jaylen Warren, only 5 for Gainwell. You had Caleb Johnson not getting a single snap after getting 6 carries the week before. So it was super positive for Warren. I will admit, this is still somewhat fragile. Gainwell is clearly a decent running back, and there's always a chance that they go back to him a little bit at some point. Caleb Johnson, someone they gave up, it was a 3rd-round pick to draft him. Someone that the organization is definitely high on. Someone that I think at some point is still going to get opportunities, but who's clearly fallen out of favor, but could fall back into favor at any point. So we don't 100% know. But even still factoring all of that in, I have Warren right now as my running back 16 rest of season. The hope is basically you look to the Warren team in your league. You hope that you see him in the flex spot on the bench. You hope to see 2 running backs ahead of him, because at that point, if they're not like relying on his production, maybe you can get him for a little bit cheaper. I don't know what's going to happen in your league. The hope is you can swap him for like a wide receiver 2 and play that sort of game. If the person is relying on him as a running back 2, it's a little bit more thin because they're going to be asking a lot more for him, because they should, right? Because he has more value to them. So hopefully if he's like their 3rd or hopefully 4th best running back, then definitely go after him for, again, I think for a wide receiver 2 swap would be good. Thinking about players I'd be trading away, or at least considering getting off my roster right now, would still be DeAndre Swift. He's historically been really bad at playing through injury, and he's got a groin injury right now. But even not factoring that in, Monangai looks really good as an early down back. I think it's pretty clear that they want these two to not have a 50-50 split, but for Monangai to mix in a lot on the ground rest of season. The Bears have also been super run-heavy post-bye, and while that's been great, like it's awesome that they figured out this ground game, that they're finally efficient on the ground. That is awesome, and it's something they want, and it's something that's very important to that offense. And it does benefit DeAndre Swift. Part of the reason we really like DeAndre Swift is because he wins in fantasy in the receiving game. Like when you have a very pass-heavy offense and you've got DeAndre Swift on it, he's okay on the ground. He mostly just gets what's blocked for him. He's okay on the ground, but he racks up, 4, 5, 6 receptions, and that benefits us a lot in fantasy. That hasn't really been happening. He only has 4 total targets over the last 2 weeks combined. He's been getting there on 7.7 and 6.5 yards per carry, which is obviously unsustainable, especially for someone like DeAndre Swift, who's historically been very inefficient on the ground. So I obviously like that he's playing well, that this offense is playing well enough. I would say the offense is playing well on the ground. They could still use improvements through the air. It's not like I'm trying to panic sell DeAndre Swift because he's been bad. He's been really good. I'm not trying to just give him away for nothing. But I have some concerns that Monangai is going to mix in more and more. The organization, like even the front office, really likes Monangai. He's clearly a hit for them in the 7th round, which is crazy. We have 2 7th-round hits this season, but they clearly like him. He's going to have a role. So I have some concerns about that. But then the big kicker is the strength of schedule. I don't deny that you could just throw Swift into running back 2 every week and just take the points. But if we're trying to win a championship, we should be looking at what the playoff schedule is. And unfortunately, the Bears have the single hardest strength of schedule in the playoffs, or in the fantasy playoffs, of course, for running backs: Browns, Packers, 49ers. It's just 3 matchups that we're really just not going to love DeAndre Swift in, and especially Browns and Packers. Those are the 2 toughest for running backs, besides, I guess, the Bucs. Having those back-to-back in the first 2 weeks of fantasy playoffs just makes it a little bit less likely you can make it to that championship weekend. And so right now, rest of the season, I'd prefer all of Genty, Bucky Irving, Scadaboo, Judkins, Kyren Williams, and Jaylen Warren over DeAndre Swift. But ideally, again, I love the 2-for-1 trades if you can package DeAndre Swift with a wide receiver 2 and target either a running back or a wide receiver 1 in return. Then another running back I look to sell is Travis Etienne. He's coming off his 2nd lowest snap share of the season and his fewest opportunities of the season as well. Many people look at the box score and be like, oh, that's obviously just because of the blowout run. They probably played him a ton in the first half and didn't play him in the second half. That is not the case. His first and second half snaps were very similar. He played a little bit more in the first half, but it was marginal. And actually, 27 of his 44 rushing yards from last week came on the final drive of the game when they were down 35-7. So in reality, 49% of his total yardage, even counting receiving, did come in garbage time. Came on literally the last drive of the game when they were down 28 points. The Jaguars are also on bye this week. And so if you're in a tough spot, you're 2-5 and you're I don't know if I can survive another loss, because once you hit that 6th loss, it becomes a lot more difficult. It depends on your league. Some leagues have 12 teams, 6 make playoffs. Brutal, right? But if it's 10 teams, 6 make playoffs, you could maybe afford that 6th loss and still be fine. But you want to avoid getting 6 losses. So if you're something like 2-5 right now, and you're not in a great situation, and if you kind of can't afford to not have him right now, plus you're worried long-term, it'd be great to just trade him away, get someone you can play this week. Jacksonville also has the 3rd hardest playoff strength of schedule for running backs. They're at Denver in the fantasy semifinals, at the Colts in the finals. Those are likely two trailing game scripts for the Jaguars and are two spots that I definitely don't want to be playing Travis Etienne in. So right now he's a running back 19 rest of season, 2 spots behind DeAndre Swift as a reference, but I also don't see him moving up. I think for Swift, again, I want to reiterate, I'm not like panic selling him. I think in 3 weeks, could he be the running back 14 rest of the season? Maybe, if he continues to hit, continues to play well, and we don't see Monangai ramp up. But I don't really see it happening with Etienne as we trend towards this bad playoff strength of schedule, as we trend towards, Tootin likely getting mixed in more and more. I imagine that Etienne at 19 right now in a month is like my running back 24, 25. Like I imagine he trends that way. So why not sell him? Because again, if he's trending that way and then he also has brutal matchups in the semifinals and the finals, I mean, that's what we want to happen, right, to our team. So again, I trade him away right now. Then finally, back to a buy. I think it's Tet McMillan at wide receiver. As a blanket statement, just look at the schedule and be like, okay, who did Sauce Gardner play this week? Who was the wide receiver one playing the Jets? Whenever that happens, that player is not going to have a good game. You can try and buy low on them the following week. That was unfortunately Tet McMillan last week. I can promise you Tet is an extremely talented wide receiver. He's going to have some awesome games rest of season. Bryce Young, I don't think he's going to play this week. I don't know how long he's going to be out, but that injury might expedite the breakout for Tet McMillan because Andy Dalton has supported high-end fantasy producers in the past. I don't know if Tet's going to drop a nuke against the Bills or the Packers this coming 2 weeks, but he's certainly capable of it, and the schedule does lighten up after that. I view Tet as like a weekly wide receiver 2. I really think maybe a low-end wide receiver 2, maybe ideally at that wide receiver 3 spot in the flex spot. But right now, that's kind of where I view him. I think you truly could put him into wide receiver 2 and feel good about that rest of the season. Because I also want to note like the game scripts that have happened thus far. He starts the season off with 2 trailing game scripts. And so in the first 2 games of his career, 9 and 10 targets. Pretty good, right? And he does well, is productive on those targets. Then he's got a blowout win and a blowout loss, where he does great in the first half, but isn't really used in the second half. Since then, he went 6 for 73. Then he has his 2 touchdown breakout game, and then he gets shut down by Sauce Gardner. So, and these are all the last 3 games in Panthers wins. So he's been pretty solid. He just kind of hasn't hit yet for that nuke game, but there's been weird game scripts. I mean, in the last 5, it's 2 blowout games, 3 wins for the Panthers, which is weird. Again, rest of the season, they're projected to win 2 more games. So we're not looking at a bunch of winning game scripts for the Panthers, but you add in the Sauce game, you add in that he's a rookie, right? We always know the data is unbelievably clear that in the second half of rookie wide receiver seasons, that's when they have their breakout. That's when they have their big games. And so, I don't know, if we're looking at a bunch of trailing game scripts with potentially better quarterback play from who's going to be a superstar wide receiver, I would definitely be trying to trade for him if you can, especially coming off a bad game. So, those are the players I'd be trading for. Use the rest season rankings. Use the strength of schedule on the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow to go over my Week 8 rankings. Make sure you're subscribed on either YouTube or Spotify so you don't miss out on that one. But that'll do it for this one, and thank you all for watching.